Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Coacharya Colloquium webinar. We have a very special guest today, and I'm quite delighted at learning more and more about her, including the fact that she's a Coacharya trained coach, and she did coach training under Ram. So that was quite pleasing to learn about that too. I'd love to introduce to you Amrita Madhya, who is the Director for Talent Development for Adobe India. And besides all the brilliant role and task and wonderful things she does, she's just a warm-hearted, very deep, thought-provoking person when you get into conversation with, and a good sense of humor too. Today's webinar is all about a tool or a performance management process. It's not a tool, sorry. It's a performance management process called Check-In. And in preparation for this webinar, I went and did some background work on Adobe and some brilliant stuffs there on the Adobe website, just to learn more about it so I could engage with Amrita and with you on the topic. And Amrita and I had a meeting a few days ago in which she explained the process to me. And while listening to her, I kept thinking, wow, this is coaching, and that's a coaching tool, or that's a coaching philosophy, that's a coaching approach. So the word coaching kept coming up. And also, I kept thinking, how much of core competencies are in what she was saying? So I'll keep that aside for now, and I'd encourage you to also pay attention to what you are noticing as Amrita is talking or going through a presentation. And, engage in the chat, write down your thoughts or your questions or something that's standing out for you. Amrita will go through a presentation and explain to you a bit about the process. And we will stop for a while and take some questions or engage in some discussions. And she will then continue. And again, we would round up with questions and discussion points. Without anything more, I welcome our speaker for today and hand over to her. Amrita, it's over to you.
Thank you, Cindy. That was so warm, unexpected, but wonderful. Thanks for that introduction. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're from. This is really exciting to be on this webinar today, and I really hope that there's something in it for everyone. Like Cindy said, while I do have a slide deck, the idea is not to bore you with a presentation. So if you've got questions, I can see them popping up. Feel free to drop them in anywhere. I'm not hung up on the slides, so I'm really happy to stop. Yeah, so let me go ahead and start to share quickly the slides that I have, and more importantly, what I thought might be useful to share today. So just give me one moment. I think we'll be ready. Let me see, is everybody able to see my slides? Yeah, I think you can, right? All right, so like Cindy said, I work for Adobe, and our mission is to change the world through digital experiences. We were just chatting about what do you know about Adobe and what products do you associate with Adobe, and it's probably PDF, probably Photoshop, and maybe some of you who use some others know a few other products. But here's what's really interesting. We do work with both individuals, budding artists, individual users like you and me, but also large corporations, helping them really design and deliver their best work. And the reason this is actually important is because in terms of our mission, this is what we're saying. We really are empowering people to create, as well as businesses to transform and compete. This is very important in terms of looking at how check-in can make a difference, because we're trying to keep what's really front and center is in terms of these two pieces of, creativity and business transformation. as the core to what we're really looking at in check-in as well. I'll explain that to you in a moment. Let me quickly tell you a little bit about Adobe for context. We really have, moved over and transformed as a business in the last 5 years. Many of you who've bought Adobe products have probably bought a box which had a CD, or you got yourself a license that was pre-installed in your computer, and you could use those Adobe products forever. So it was a perpetual license. And we moved over to a subscription model in 2013. And one of those big changes was also, it's not that simple to move from something that's a box to a cloud-based system of subscription. So everything changed, right? It means that our business processes changed, the way we did business with our customers changed. It also meant the way as employees we worked needed to change very dramatically. We couldn't possibly look at long lead times in terms of development, product enhancements, new features, etc., because customers were actually paying either monthly, quarterly, or annual subscriptions. Clearly, we needed to deliver value. So everything internally needed to change to match that external change, which I'm sure is obvious to you. Where we are today, we have 3 clouds. That's Adobe's Creative Cloud, which has, like I said, it has Photoshop, for example, or Illustrator products that you might be familiar with. Adobe's Document Cloud is where PDF or Acrobat is housed, as an example. And then we have Adobe's Experience Cloud, which really helps businesses measure and monetize, for example, or get analytics on how their business is actually doing based on, let's say, advertising campaigns that they run. And under it all is our own artificial intelligence, Adobe Sensei, which is really helping bring these 3 clouds and the way our customers engage with these products much closer and much smarter. This is very simply what our products are about. And Cindy was saying earlier, I thought it was only Photoshop. You're not the only one if you're thinking that way. Most people do think and associate us only with Photoshop, but here's a little more about us very quickly. We're probably one of the largest, most diversified software companies in the world. 18,000 odd employees, 37 countries, been around 35 years globally, 20 years in India. India, incidentally, also has 1/3 of Adobe's employee population. And of course, we continuously are looking at patents that we're actually putting out, because we're in the creative industry, we're also in a creative organization. So that's very quickly about us. Let me move on to give you a background to how we got to check-in and why I spoke about our business transformation. We're saying make everything an experience. That's our business line. That's how we're looking at it from our customer's perspective. So we actually needed to take a look inwards and looked at what is the experience our employees are having in the process of making it an experience for our customers. And so as far back as 2012, and you'll see all of this on our website as well, there was a lot of conversation around what are we going to do differently within the organization with our head of employee experience, as we know it now, or HR, as everyone else knows it. And one of the things we've been talking about constantly is how do we make sure that people are spending their time where it really matters? And are we getting the most out of our employees' time? That was really the genesis of it. Of course, there's more details and the real lowdown on it on our website. But essentially, it was a comment that our head of HR made in India saying, I think I'm going to get rid of the annual performance rating system because it really is a big time drag. And it caught the newspapers. She went in India, she went back to the US, and then we actually started to think about how we're going to make something like this happen, because it's true. It can make a big difference. And that's really how it started, in the point of saying, how do we make employees' experience and time count and be more productive? Where can we actually make this work for us? So having said that, what did we do? We actually went in and spoke with employees who were individual contributors, were people managers, were leaders, and essentially asked them, what do you like about this entire process of performance management? Because we had a rating system, and we'd gone through many rating systems by then. People spent between 3 to 4 months of their overall time going through this process of performance management, where they were reviewing, putting in ratings, etc. Then, as you're all familiar with, there's a huge amount of angst in actually delivering that message, communicating that rating, having a challenge owning that rating, explaining it, and everything else that goes with it. And so we literally went on to our internal blog sites, put out questions to ask employees, tell us what you think. We got a lot of feedback, much more than we even anticipated, and some great feedback, basically telling us that this was the whole process of an annual performance review was taking a lot of time, didn't feel like it was adding a lot of value, didn't feel like it was empowering, didn't feel like it was two-way, that the employee had a choice, but was more delivered a message. And also more than anything else, just didn't give you a good feeling. In fact, there were some people who would describe it as, when we came to that point in the year when we had to do performance management, I just felt like there was a dark cloud over my head. I didn't want to go to work. Fairly dramatic, right? But true. And that was really good feedback for us to actually take into account and figure out, what do we really need to do to save employees' time? One survey actually threw up that managers were probably spending 80,000 hours in a year collectively to do annual performance reviews. The question was, is it really giving us the results we want to? Also we're thinking about changing our business model around this time. And we're saying we're going to have to be faster, more agile, more quick to respond to customers. The way we design software, the way we innovate has to change. Then clearly the way our employees work needs to change. And then clearly the way we manage performance needs to change. So we really did try to mirror our internal models to our business model as well. Right? So that's kind of how we got started. And this is the way we also tried to crowdsource and have employees own the process that we were coming up with, versus it being something that was just delivered to them. So that's the background to it. Having said that, these are all the kind of folks that we went in to speak with. And what helped was, as change management goes, very early on in the process, we had already involved all of our stakeholders. All we were saying is, hey, we've heard that it's a pain. Tell us how we can solve this. What will work for you? And I think it worked extremely well. Though I make a confession, it's been 5 years. I can't say yet that I'm ready to declare victory. We've cracked the code, but we've made really significant strides. So as we go along and I talk about measurement, let me share with you there how we are actually measuring whether we're successful and what are some of the other outcomes of having gone to check-in. I'd like to call check-in our performance management philosophy, not so much a process, because it's actually laying out a way to work and less so mandating how you do it. And I'll walk you through that in a moment. So this is all of the history. I know where I'm going here now is to actually show you what check-in looks like if you haven't already seen it. So maybe I can pause if anybody has any questions for me before we get into talking about check-in itself. Is there anything? I could see some blips going up, but I can't read any comments. So I don't know if there are any, Cindy.
No questions as yet, or comments or discussion points.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, of course. I just want to say, I like this collaborative process that I went into, before getting into developing check-in. Yeah.
In fact, I don't think we had a name for it either. It kind of, came along the way as to what do we want to do and how often and how much is too much or too little. And so in many ways, there's lots of videos out there, and I think you have it on adobe.com as well, where employees are really saying, it was the best thing you could have done, is take away annual performance reviews. So in many ways, it was born internally. Yeah.
Amrita, I have one question here. How many people, this question is about, let's see, here, Boris. How many people of the organization did you engage with and how? I think this continues the conversation we're having, yeah.
Yeah, great question. Boris, did you say? Since I can't see it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I meant to actually share. What we did was to get on our intranet and our blog site and ask people to tell us what they thought. So we asked them about 4 or 5 questions. What do you find useful about the process? What do you least like? What do you think we can do better? What works for you? And share answers. So what we did, therefore, was a lot of these answers were not actually coming into us anonymously. You could also see what other people were writing, right? So we tried to use our own our intranet or our blog sites to encourage a group dialogue so that everything remained transparent. We also received a lot of emails coming in from employees who may not have been comfortable going onto our intranet to also come and tell us what they liked and didn't like, because sometimes you might be saying something about your manager, your manager's manager, etc. In terms of numbers, I mean, it's hard to give you an exact number because we did go after the number. It's more the response. But we literally, at that time, 5 years ago, we were about 1,100, 1,200 people globally. And we probably got about a couple of thousand responses in all these different media. Then, of course, we did a few focus groups because we took it back to our leadership and we said, here's the feedback we've got. Now you tell us, how do you think we're going to make this work for you and for the business? Now that's the approach we took. And like I said, it was a little bit more organic. It wasn't perfectly planned. And we didn't have, milestones we were going after and this many people we want to cover. Frankly, we were also overwhelmed by the response we got the minute we open sourced this dialogue or this discussion. And so I hope that answers the question.
There's a few more here, Amrita. Are you okay with taking more?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go.
Okay. There's one from Svea. What percentage of the total employee headcount participated in giving information about how they experienced performance?
Okay. That's probably a build on Boris's question as well. Like I said, we were probably around 12,000, roughly 12,000 people at that time globally. And we probably got around, I'd say 2,000 responses. It may not have been 2,000 employees, but at least that many hits in terms of actual comments coming through, if that's any percentage to, actually go by. I think why that may not be a really good measure to look at as well is sometimes when somebody sees their ideas or their point of view has already been written on a blog post, they won't tend to actually write it out themselves because they can see it's already up there. But there could be more people thinking the same way. So I'm not sure if, a couple of thousand is a good measure. Maybe there were more people thinking that way.
And we'll take this one more from Jackie. Again, it's a build on. This one has a slightly different angle. Did you have to work to sell this to upper management?
I'm sorry, did you have to work?
To sell this to upper management.
See, that's the beauty of it, Jackie. The minute we put it out there more open sourced and said, you tell us what you think, everybody's reading what employees actually feel about the process. So half the selling's already done, right? Which is to say, people are really dissatisfied with the current process on these 5 areas: the time that it takes, the experience it leaves you with, the fact that it's not participative or doesn't feel participative, and that it tends to become a really uncomfortable, awkward conversation. It feels disconnected, there's too much time, those kind of things. So half the battle's already won when you hear this feedback. I think what we should do and how do we need to model it was where there was a selling point. But the very fact, like I said, that we were already transforming our business made it that much easier to say, why would we not transform the way we do things internally when we are going to transform the way we do business with our customers? So in many ways, that dialogue was much simpler. But like I said, we're not ready to claim victory because there were many things that, we would learn along the way in the last 5 years that we have been improving. So we didn't have the perfect solution at first go. We also literally ripped the Band-Aid off. Once we'd made the decision that we'd go away with a rating system, a lot of companies who talk to us actually ask us, does it make sense to go with one business unit for 1 year and see what happens? Because we're really a very large organization. Many of them are bigger than us. And our response usually is, you can do that, but you also, in that 1 year, there's a significant portion of your business that's not actually progressing or solving for the problem you're trying to solve. So you may not really want to incubate with one business unit. We just went straight from an annual performance review to check-in one review cycle. And I don't think it didn't hurt too much. It really felt like ripping the Band-Aid off in the long run.
Murugan, you asked, or you proposing a topic which is around performance versus potential management, and you're raising the question, will there be any discussion? So I suggest that we pick up that one towards the end after Amrita has completed with the presentation.
Sure, and Murugan, maybe some of it will get answered when I show you the check-in model, if you haven't seen it already, to talk about performance and potential, because clearly we want to measure that as well and we want to look at it. So I'll cover that in a moment.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Any others? Should we move? Would you like me to answer anything else?
I think for now, it's okay, Amrita.
All right. So, oops, why am I not able to move this? There you go. So, here's check-in. This is what we came up with. Couple of things. We had got all the feedback you heard me share. So we said, let's simplify the process. What do we really want to do? We want to make sure that managers and their employees are setting expectations that are clear to both, right? And that they have a connection to business goals as well as individual goals. Simple. Then we went over and said, what else does someone need to be successful? You need to get feedback. You can't wait to get feedback much later. So you need to get that feedback as frequently as possible. I think somebody might not be on mute. Okay, great. So you need to get feedback. And it's not just employees who need to get feedback. Managers should get feedback as well. It needs to be ongoing. All right, what else do we need? Okay, individuals need to know what's in it for them because there is growth and development that's obviously a critical factor. So let's make sure that growth and development is also part of this conversation that they need to have. And it literally took me 1 minute to explain this to you. That's how much we wanted to simplify what is check-in all about. The next thing we said is just by the name, we're calling it check-in. You don't check in once in a year, you check in frequently. So how frequently is frequent? We said we'd recommend to employees check in every quarter because at the end of the day, while we're a product development organization, we're also in the business of selling our products. So we have a quarterly business cycle. Why don't we also recommend that employees check in with their managers every quarter? So that's how we got into the piece of it being more constructive and regular. Right? So that's how quickly and simply we want to be able to make check-in look like it's not cumbersome and it doesn't follow with a ton of instructions and rules on how it needs to be done. So every conversation that an employee and manager have, ideally once a quarter, should cover expectation setting, feedback, and growth and development for the individual. That's check-in for you. So how about I pause again here and take any questions that you have. I'll move on to the structures that we have behind it, what support, what training, those kind of things. So if those become the questions you're asking, I can go ahead and answer. But if you have any first reactions to this model of check-in and really the philosophy, let's take some of those.
Feed forward.
Oh, sorry, Cindy, I couldn't hear you. You were on mute.
Okay. Arun says he's getting a sense of what Goldsmith calls feed forward. Is that something Adobe looked at?
Yes, I think so. Not consciously, but it's a good way to actually frame it today. Is if it becomes, and remember, one of the problems we spoke of was annual performance reviews felt like it was a one-way street. So if you think about feed forward as well, you also want to make sure that the only person that's involved is not just the employee, but the manager. And then let it also look at how can we get better for next quarter versus it being retrospective only. So yes, that was the idea too.
So there's a question from Srini. Was your new check-in process used as an input for the reward cycle?
Yes, absolutely. So we still obviously follow an annual reward cycle, right? but that made the rewards conversation that much simpler. So we decoupled having an annual performance review as also the annual rewards conversation. So if I'm having 4 quarterly conversations with my manager, then I'm decoupling feedback related to expectations, goal setting, and development with here's what the years look like and here's how you're being rewarded. And the minute we decoupled that, I have to say that's when I want to just, throw my hands up in the air and say that's awesome. Because now the conversation on rewards has so much context that if there is any doubt or angst or challenge, that's already been taken care of because of the frequency of conversations. That is probably one of the single most empowering aspects of check-in when it comes to managing performance and rewards for managers and for employees. There's far less in terms of surprise because of this decoupling.
Amrita, this question, how can organizations, am I muted? Okay,
No,
thanks, Amrita. There's a question here from Nina, which I'm not sure whether you want to take now or leave it for later. I'll just ask you the question. How can organizations make check-ins a way of life?
It's a lovely question. In fact, I might also want to hear back from everyone in the room. What did they think? Maybe like you said towards the end.
Yeah, I think so.
But as a short answer, I don't think you can adopt check-in in isolation. This isn't it's not as simple as plug and play. It needs to fit in with the philosophy or the culture of your organization. It needs to fit with the values of the organization. If it doesn't, then it's very easy to misuse this philosophy as well. And let me tell you why. We don't have, all right, so here's some of the shockers. So we've got this philosophy of you need to have a quarterly conversation. It should have these 3 elements, 1, 2, 3. Great, sounds great. But we're also saying, yes, you don't need to use a tool. There is no tool. Paper and pen, that's a tool. Email, that's a tool. Conversation, that's a tool. Paper napkin, that's a tool as well. So we don't actually have tools specifically like technology and software, which will trigger off an invitation to somebody saying, you need to have your check-in. Have you had your check-in? You don't need to go put it somewhere and say you have had a check-in. We don't have a specific format saying you have to document feedback using this format, but we definitely recommend documenting feedback. So we've taken away some of those hard processes from managers and employees. We have an individual development plan format. We have tons of discussion guides. You'll see all of them on our website, but we don't mandate using any. So it's great fun and highly empowering. It can absolutely go the other way if someone does not have these conversations every quarter. Tough luck when they find out at the end of 1 year that they haven't been having regular conversations. Their employees up in arms. They get really bad engagement scores from our internal employee survey, which we also call check-in. And then you realize it could have easily been sorted if I'd had these conversations regularly. So it's a lot of self-regulation that is involved. Therefore, I said it's not a simple plug and play because it needs a certain amount of organizational maturity when you're given this kind of freedom to be able to use it responsibly. Yeah, so that's what I would think of to implement check-in. It's like you went from high school to university and all of a sudden you have all this freedom. You could go completely berserk or you could use it responsibly. That's kind of akin to that.
Amrita, since we've just got we've got 30 minutes left, I suggest to continue, and there's a few sharings with some questions from Banu, Svea, Ashwin, Vijay, and here, which I will pick up a bit later.
Okay, so like I said, very quickly, the key principles we looked at was what I just spoke about. Is it simple and lightweight? I should be able to tell you what check-in is all about in less than a minute or 2. And if you noticed, it's actually pretty simple, right, to explain. The other is flexibility in timing and method. While we recommend once a quarter, some managers and teams may not have those conversations, but here's the fun of it. If you're in a sales organization and you work quarter on quarter, you know that it's in your best interest in your teams to have a quarterly check-in, right? And it's also tied in with some hard metrics as well. If you work, for example, in teams that are developing software and running on sprints of 6 weeks, or 8 weeks. Maybe you want to have a check-in at the end of a sprint. It's up to you. The point is, have them regularly, have them frequently, let them be continuous. The other part of documentation is what I just shared. Right? We're not fussed about it. In fact, people may use an external survey tool, use some other, document sharing tools, all kinds of things. And quite honestly, that's a little cottage industry all by itself, because different, teams have figured out different ways. And if it works for you, go for it, is really how we say it. This piece about no victim mentality, if you ask me, is also one of the big wins. Because now that we've said, and if I go back for a minute, if you notice here, it says for expectations, we're saying managers set clear expectations to help employees achieve business goals. So there's a little bit more onus on the manager when it comes to goal setting. Obviously, we want employees to clarify, but the manager's helping set those expectations. But if you see feedback, we're clearly saying it is about providing feedback to each other. It is a two-way process. That's the way we're putting it out. And if we look at development, we're saying with support from their managers, employees drive their own development. So we're now putting the development piece firmly in the saddle for employees. Now, it's very hard to feel like a victim if you're actually following all parts of this process and if it is flowing continuously. That's something we're seeing consistently happen. Employees are actually taking a lot more responsibility in their own performance management than they would have in the past. And that's what you see as the rest of the points as well. It's also for us to help manage top of the class, because we're not looking at slotting somebody at the bottom of the bell curve. We're just basically working with each individual and their goals. But let me be honest, when you get to rewards check-in, in some way you have a certain amount of money that you're actually dividing between your team. You are going to divide based on performance. So effectively, whether it's looking linear or it's looking vertical, you probably are stacking your team. What you're not doing is putting numbers or ratings against them, but you're talking about qualitatively and quantitatively, how will you define their performance? That's what has made, I think, a big difference. Yeah, so these are some of our principles for design. I'll cover one more piece, Cindy, and then I'll pause, which I was just telling you about rewards check-in. One of the big rewards for rewards check-in, it's a far painless process today than before. I can be quite confident to say bloodshed is much, much less now than before, because it's not coming as a shock. The other really interesting thing is even involuntary attrition that we would be looking at, and voluntary attrition, where people actually at the end of performance reviews, we would find a big spike. I think we're doing far better in our industry than anyone else. Like I said, there's no shock value for a rewards conversation. There's a lot more preparedness, there's a lot less surprise. And that's a big win for us in terms of measurement. Another quick one on measurement really is that, like I told you, we have our company engagement survey, which we also call check-in. We've done it many different ways. We've done it every quarter, and we've done it annually. And right now we're doing it twice in a year. But it's giving us some really good inputs in terms of managers. And we ask very explicit questions on check-in. There's a section on check-in about the quality of conversations people are having, frequency of conversations, whether they find value in the process of having those check-in conversations. So what it tells us immediately is, are there some managers who are still struggling with following check-in in the way that best works for them? And then we only focus on those managers from the perspective of support and enablement, because we also know check-in is a driver for employee engagement. Yeah, no brainer here. I'm sure this is familiar to everybody, but that's one of the ways we test out. Then we also run a lot of training for new employees, for example, coming in from other organizations, or those that we hire off campus, so that they understand check-in early in their career, typically within the first 2 months. And the idea is, if you've come from another organization which was actually using a bell curve system, it's a bit of unlearning, right? Before you learn what check-in is about and you get comfortable. Now, we ask some questions here when we do this sort of training. And 4 years ago, when I joined Adobe, I remember when we started doing this training, we asked people, how often are you having conversations, check-in conversations? And we gave them options of quarterly, half-yearly, annually, never, sometimes. And we had probably about 50%, closer to 50% saying that we were having frequent conversations. It's definitely something to be worried about, but it had only been about a year or so since we started. And we figured people were still getting the hang of this freedom. We asked another question: how satisfied are you with the quality of conversation you're having? And again, we got probably 40-60, 40% saying yes, this is good, 60% no opinion. Now 4 years down, or even last year, 3 years down, the numbers have changed dramatically. The number of people saying they're having a regular conversation, it's at least 3/4 of the organization. A regular conversation could mean once a quarter or a little more frequently. And the quality of conversations is well into the 60s or 70s, as our check-in survey scores tell us, that the quality has dramatically improved. And if you're going to ask me how's that happened, I wish I could say it's all because of all the training my team does. We'll take a tiny piece of credit for that, but I think it is because people have started to see the value of having those conversations regularly as managers, because who wants to be holding the sign with a bad message at the end of 1 year when you could have saved it with more regular conversations? So I think the process itself has built the habit and the culture along the way, but that without very specific tools to force people into it. So we've allowed people to adopt the philosophy versus mandated it on them. And so that's how we're actually looking at some of the measures. So let me stop here and see if there are questions.
Okay, so I just wanted to ask something.
Mm-hmm.
You've probably got a sense of people changing and a sense of their mood and their energy and just perhaps lightness. Or what sense did you get from the whole system after implementing the new check-in?
Oh my God, huge sense of relief.
Yeah.
Because like I said, who wants to spend or dedicate 2 months or 3 months of their time laboring over looking at Excel sheets, putting in numbers, matching the numbers, balancing them out, when you could be spending that time on the business? So huge sense of relief for managers especially, right? Because that's where the burden lies. I think for employees, a sense of a lot more transparency, because you're having a conversation and you're having it more frequently. And over time, a feeling of I'm not going to be stabbed in the back. It's not going to be a surprise. I'm not going to be told about feedback about something I did 6 months ago. And that builds over time, right? And if you've had, for whatever reason, unfortunate, unpleasant experiences, it takes time to change. I think that was, like I told you, somebody said, I felt like a dark cloud had lifted. As dramatic as it sounds, I think that's how a lot of people described it. Yeah.
You seem to have been pioneers in developing a new way of doing things. How did you feel about the process working?
So, to be honest, Cindy, I inherited this. I joined Adobe after it had happened, but it was definitely, it was about 1.5 years since we'd gotten into, or 2 years since we'd gotten into check-in. So it was one of the things that I was very excited about, the organization thinking that's very forward thinking, because that's a very mature way of looking at performance management. And it's also very liberating for a leader. From where I joined and what I saw, I think one of the things that was, the best part of the process that I see continuously evolving, the role of a manager as a coach, truly and honestly, is actually evolved with check-in. I think the underlying capability for a manager here is to be a coach, because it isn't about telling you what to do and say, off you go, make it happen. It's a conversation, it's a dialogue, and it's participative. So to me, that was the most appealing process today. Even today, this is what really employees as managers, if they aren't able to get check-in right, many times it's because they're struggling with the process of being a coach versus someone who's just giving instructions and expecting to be followed when you're in a more empowered system. So very enjoyable, very tough. We haven't completely cracked it, but we're definitely on a good path. And I can say that in the 4 years I've been here that I've seen it change. Yeah, so wouldn't change it back for anything.
Oh, I can imagine, of course not, right? To the attendees, I know there's quite a few questions there, but I guess for some of you, the questions may now have evolved. So I'd like to invite you to come up and join the panel and ask the question that's now playing on your mind. Just raise your hand and Magda will Magda will do something to get you up into the panel. Come join us and engage in a conversation with Amrita. We have a few minutes to do that.
To those of you who raised your hands, you need to unmute yourself to speak.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Amrita. Hi. This is Ashwin.
Hi, Ashwin.
Okay, so I was very intrigued by your this entire philosophy of check-in. So I just want to kind of one check with you rather. How are you really, how has it really helped to improve performance, whether at an individual level, at a team level, or at an organizational level?
Great question, Ashwin. Thanks for asking.
Amrita,
I think a couple of things.
Amrita, sorry to disturb you. Can you stop your screen share for a minute, please?
Okay, sure.
There we
is this
go.
better? Okay.
Okay.
All righty. So, great question, Ashwin. This is about how we seen performance change, right? Let's go with some of the lag indicators. One, I think, like I said earlier, attrition at the end of a annual cycle, which is voluntary attrition, actually significantly decreased globally. And that, if you ask me, straight away tells us that people are probably much more engaged and better prepared along the year to perform. Involuntary attrition, where we're actually trying to manage out low performance as well, is becoming, and I won't say it's completely solved for, but is becoming much simpler for us now for exactly the same reason. Is because these conversations are so frequent, we're able to identify a lot earlier when somebody is starting to struggle in terms of performance. And so we have an opportunity to actually address involuntary attrition much quicker. It is, of course, dependent on the fact that we don't we don't mandate documentation otherwise. But let's say at the end of 1 or 2 quarters where you're doing a check-in and you realize someone's performance is starting to fail, then we start moving into a piece of documentation from the purpose of ensuring both the employee and the manager are very clear about where this is headed. So it's helping us a lot more even for involuntary attrition. I think the single biggest impact from a business perspective is the fact that, like I said, most of our products are in a highly competitive space. Some of our products are in a significantly monopolistic space. And so where we are playing, where we are actually in a highly competitive space, the fact that we're actually performance managing, if you will, or having performance conversations frequently really helps realign the goalpost. So a lot of our goal setting conversations, because sometimes that's a shifting goalpost, happen more frequently and more consistently. And the way we measure this is when we look at engagement and how people feel about understanding, particularly one question, which is, the work I do contributes significantly to Adobe's success. Now, if I'm not having that conversation regularly to see how my goals align with the larger organization goals, I'm never going to be able to answer that well enough. So I think we see an impact on engagement as much as on performance as a result of this frequency in conversation, and attrition, of course, is the other outcome. I hope that helps, Ashwin.
Yeah, Amrita, I have a question. This is Arun here.
Yes,
you mentioned about coaching. So I just wanted to check what steps did Adobe take to equip their managers for coaching rather than mentoring?
It's a good question, Arun. I don't think we went after it, and we don't even today, qualifying what the manager is doing as coaching versus mentoring. It's another topic altogether if I get started on it, because a lot of times we found our managers getting caught up in the semantics of, am I coaching someone or am I mentoring somebody? Instead, what we did, Arun, was we created a host of templates and collateral to help both a manager as well as an employee have a conversation effectively when it is goal setting, when it's feedback, and when it's development. It's actually, on the face of it, very simple. I might make it sound complex, and you'll find that on our website as well. They were just simple one-pagers, but if you see the way they're framed, a lot of them are asking questions and asking insightful questions or questions that will make employees reflect, which is what you do as a coach. It's also asking the employee to take responsibility, which is what you would do in a coaching relationship. So that's how we kind of built it in without specifically teaching or training our managers to be coaches or to mentor. Last thing I'll add is there are obviously many times in conversations like check-in where the focus is on goals and expectations, feedback, and individuals' growth and development, where the manager may actually have to step in and provide a solution or a set of solutions to have the employee pick from, in which case traditionally the manager is probably not coaching. And that's the reason we haven't labeled it as coaching. But if you step away and zoom out of that circle, you'll see there are multiple opportunities for managers to coach. And so we don't call it that, but that's how we're actually building their skills along the way. Yeah. Maybe one last thing I'll share with you is in all of our manager development and leadership development, what we spend a lot of time doing is actually enabling managers to peer coach other managers. And essentially we're saying have conversations, because coaching somehow may feel like a very high level skill, but having a conversation and helping the other person figure out the solution for themselves is something we can all easily do. So that's how we try to build that capability in classrooms. And then we provide a lot of collateral, which hopefully pushes you in that direction.
Thank you, Amrita.
Welcome.
Who's going next? Adriana, you want to ask your question?
Just a reminder, I'm muting everyone so we don't echo. So please unmute yourself to ask your question.
Okay.
Yeah, Vishy here. You mentioned that when managers seek feedback from their employees, do managers have also to check in those feedback, or the feedback that managers receive on employee engagement only through those surveys? Otherwise, it sounds to me just like in a one-way street, right? Quite hierarchical.
So I think, so there's two things. The check-in survey is obviously a survey for if I'm an employee, I get feedback from, if I'm a manager, I get feedback from my team, as a typical employee engagement survey would be. That's the formal way of getting feedback. But what you're asking me is it just one way? In the check-in process, which happens between manager and employee, not through a formal survey, right? Not the company survey. If you notice the circles that I spoke of, the idea, especially as the second step, which is feedback, where employees and managers are both encouraged to share feedback with each other. So employee to share feedback about their manager with their manager, and manager with the employee. So hopefully that actually breaks the hierarchical approach. It's another matter if an employee doesn't feel comfortable to give their manager feedback. And if that happens, it typically shows up in the company engagement survey. For that particular manager, you can see that the trust index is a lot lower. And then it helps us work with that manager and their team to fix whatever is not working. That's to avoid it being hierarchical, to your point. But it's not designed like that. Does that answer what you meant?
Yeah, it did, Amrita. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Amrita. I have a question for you.
Sure.
So, loved whatever you spoke about, and so it appealed a lot to the HR professional in me. But as a coach, wearing the coach hat, I'm still, a little lost about the relevance of this and this learning to me as a coach.
Very interesting. Thanks for bringing that up. It's a good way for me to think about it as well. Here's how I think the check-in philosophy appeals to managers who don't have coaching skills and formal training. is what we're trying to do, and you know, we've had this conversation once or twice within the organization of what coaching construct actually fits. For example, if you looked at the GROW model, right, just as a simple example here, we're talking really about goal setting. We're talking about where we are vis-a-vis those goals, so the reality of it, and therefore what's the gap, and therefore what are expectations. We're also talking about what are some options people have to actually solve for those gaps, right? In the bargain, we're giving feedback, feedback that works both ways. And we're also talking about what is the way forward, what needs to happen next, because it's a co-owned process. So if you look at the goal setting and expectations, which is the first part of check-in, we're actually probably following many of these steps. If you look at the piece on feedback as well, it's the same thing, because you're giving feedback based on expectations you had of the person. So we follow some parts probably. The piece on development is almost entirely this. What are your development goals? Where are you vis-a-vis those? What's the reality of it? What are the various options that you have? What's the way forward? So in many ways, even within this 3-step process of check-in, there's an opportunity to actually apply coaching, because that's how the process is designed. Very simplistically, that's how it is. Though I will admit, we didn't start out with check-in thinking about it as coaching. We're looking at check-in today and saying, you know, one of the underlying skills there that a manager needs is to be able to coach. May not be as traditional or as you know, purist as a coach would be, or an external, you know, professional coach would be. That could also be the difference. But that's how I'm seeing it at this point. It's a fair point though that you bring up about thinking of it as, like you said, a parallel system. Maybe someone else has a point of view on it.
Thanks, Amrita.
Vijay, to everyone who's interested, if you look at that PDF I was making reference to, for example, under expectations in that check-in process, you would see that one of the tools they're using is SMART goal setting. And under that is a whole lot of coaching style questions. Same with under the other 2 processes. It's really a very coaching approach. Now, I'm calling it a coaching approach because I've listened to what Amrita was saying about a week ago, and there's many coaching skills, coaching philosophy, approach, core competencies that show up. They may not have thought about it that way, but if you really go and look at that PDF, you will see it emerge.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, hi. I'm interested to know to what extent has this gone viral, and is one hearing check-in style conversations, not just in the check-in, but more in the workplace more generally, that people are beginning to speak like this in teams and not just in these individual conversations?
What a lovely question. Thank you. I'm feeling foolish. I didn't think of saying it myself. But the word check-in, or the term check-in, is actually pretty viral. You'll hear people say, you know, if there's somebody with their manager in a meeting and they're actually having a conversation, someone say, oh, wow, this is an open check-in happening right here. So it's become common language, commonplace conversation to actually say, I know what check-in means, and this is exactly what's going on between the 2 of us. So, and it's not a bad word, which is also really nice, versus somebody saying, oh, okay, looks like you're getting some feedback. You know, it's more like, looks like a check-in is happening here. So it's become a more positive word, without doubt. I'll admit that sometimes we talk about check-in ad nauseum. Sometimes you'll have the eye roll and people are saying, gosh, not again. But it isn't in the manner of this is, you know, painful, as much as this is becoming our language. So yeah, it's very much part of people's DNA today. When people join Adobe, a lot of them are telling us they've heard about check-in, and they're quite excited about the fact that it feels very empowering for an employee as much as a manager. So in some sense, I would think that it has gone viral with people like this. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And sorry, an attached question is, has this moved into group conversations yet? In other words, not just talking one-on-one, but where the alignment or the we around performance? Is it being used in any kind of group or team context yet?
So I suppose not all the three elements of check-in, because there's expectations, feedback, and growth and development. But the expectations feedback part, definitely as part of group conversation, because at the group level, that's what you want to make sure, you clarify well. We do use some tools on the side of it, like we spoke of SMART. We use another acronym, which is SAID, which is essentially giving specifics, asking questions, talking of impact, and talking about, what they should do next. Those have become parts of inter-team conversations, for example, when there may be conflict or when we're trying to build more collaboration, but we may not necessarily call it check-in. Check-in is limited to individual performance management as a philosophy, not necessarily as a team.
Amrita, before we go on, I just want to, thanks, Rhea. I just want to check in with you. We have check-in. You see, I'm already using it. 3 minutes left.
Sure.
Do you have any more slides that you want to share? Or are we okay to complete on this conversation with just taking Nitya's question? And there's one more on the chat.
I just had something on change management, but I think we've talked a lot about it. I could bring that up for a moment if anyone is keen to look at it. And I also noticed there were a bunch of questions on the chat board. So I think maybe we want to answer the questions in the chat board. In terms of change management, very quickly, we did a lot of branding work to the earlier question, is we did a lot of internal branding and communication to make check-in commonplace and everyday, right? Just like you and I just use the words check-in, a lot of our digital displays, a lot of our, danglers and physical material that was available to promote check-in. We do a lot of those activities on a regular basis, even now. For example, once we've had fortune cookies at everybody's table at lunch, and essentially opened it and gave you a little tip on how you could have a development discussion or how you could give feedback. So we do a lot of this and use internal branding to make the language really come alive and make it a way of life. That was one of the pieces we started out as part of change management, in addition to the others where I said, we enrolled leaders and got their feedback as much as we got employees' feedback. That was the only thing I had as a slide around the change management of bringing on a system like check-in and giving away a very formal performance rating process. Yeah, that's the only other thing that I had on a slide. Can't hear you, Cindy. There you go.
He is asking, he wants to understand your role. So he asked, what is your role?
I lead talent development for India PR. So all of the learning function for employees in India.
He's asking about the trust index. Could you elaborate on that? What is the trust index?
So when you do an employee engagement survey, we know that there are certain questions and responses to those questions which actually impact employees' engagement. For example, the transparency with which they can have conversations with their manager, the ability for them to grow and develop, the understanding they have of company priorities, all of these, whether they will have a career with this organization beyond the next couple of years, things like that. Likewise, we have certain questions that we ask in the engagement survey, which also tell us whether employees are in a relationship with their manager, team, and Adobe, which is a relationship of trust, meaning to say that I believe the company is going to be successful, I understand the roadmap, and I think I have a career and I can grow here. All of those elements tell us that there is a high value of trust in the organization, and those are the things we look for when we look to coach managers who may have lower scores. Yeah.
Nitya, you want to jump in, please?
Sure.
Nitya? You're on mute.
Oh.
Nitya's question
Can I
is
ask
on
the
the chat.
question, Cindy?
Yes.
Okay, so my question to you, Amrita, is that how do you manage performance metrics in this entire case? Because what I see it is being more of a dialogue, etc. And businesses now dictate that we focus on metrics, right?
Yep.
So how do you manage that?
So, great question. The conversation around goal setting and expectations is not obviously just a conversation, right? You are really looking at what are the goals that have been set. So, are there written goals? There would definitely be written goals because that's how you're going to measure performance. Every role will have some hard metrics, whether you're in software development, you're in sales, you're in consulting, or any G&A function. So, those become the metrics that are being reviewed. What this system does is creates a frequency of review, allows a frequency of opportunity to adjust those goals if something else has changed, so that you're not making that adjustment ad hoc somewhere along the way. No conversation happened around it. That's what the process of check-in does. It doesn't mean that we're just doing a hi, how are you doing, how's it going kind of conversation, versus how are you doing and tracking versus the expectations we set and the goals we set. Out of the 5 goals that we have, 2 probably have changed because some kind of business direction has changed in the last quarter. What are the new goals? So we're always reviewing hard metrics. The only thing we're not doing is converting that into a rating scale and then putting it into some kind of let's say a template or an Excel sheet. That's the only thing we're not doing. But because we have those conversations regularly, we don't actually need to do that. You already know where employee stands vis-a-vis their expectations and in comparison to their peers doing the same kind of work, just from that conversation. And from feedback that you are personally documenting as the manager or you're formally documenting with your employee. The best part about it, Nita, is at the end of 1 year, if you didn't do it, when you have to have that performance conversation, rewards conversation, you run short of things to say and justify why you have given somebody a 6% raise versus a 15% raise. And so managers who haven't followed it, they burn their hands really bad and they probably won't go there again. So that's how the system almost establishes itself without coercion.
I love this. I love this thing because it kind of encourages people to have dialogue, and the coaching process itself gets inculcated so very nicely in a person's DNA, right? Because when you're having the dialogue, you need to coach.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's amazing.
Exactly.
My only worry was with the metrics, and we've kind of had this before, this kind of a system, but I didn't view it that way actually. I didn't view it in the so I was looking at the metrics, which was was my focus. So therefore, this really helped me clarify it. Thank you.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Nitya, and nice summarizing there too. Amrita, what do you want to say to complete on your presentation? Any closing thoughts from you?
Sure. I think there's some great questions. I'm feeling bad I haven't answered a lot of them because there's some really good ones in here around, was the system created to make people more accountable? Also questions around how do you ensure homogeneity in conversations across different managers? Let me just say the idea behind making this process so simple, while on one hand, it can easily freak you out and make you think that it's all going to fail. And believe me, when we started out, we didn't know if it was going to be super successful or it would fail. We went with it because it felt like the right thing. And the chances are, if you're not watching for it carefully, it can fail. So I think while it's created as something that's simplistic, a couple of things, any change which is fairly radical and a big departure for something that's highly structured, while you need to give it time to actually settle in, I think you need to be looking at what are the support systems you're creating on the side, which don't replicate the system you let go of, right? So you create those templates and those formats, but you don't tell people you have to do this. Eventually, people will move to what makes their life easier. It is a fairly mature way of doing it. Then there's the other system or checks and balance of putting in, let's say, an engagement survey. and holding people accountable as managers to the results of their engagement survey. So now if I hold you accountable to the right levers, a lot of other pieces will fall into place. Also, like I said, if I'm the manager who has to deliver my rewards conversation at the end of the year, I better be worried about it through the year, because I'm not going to be able to wing it at the end of 12 months. So in many ways, it's the consequence that probably drives the action. If you're careful about that, a lot of adoption to the process will happen a lot more organically, not without enough, check-in. So yes, we poll people very frequently to figure out if it's working. And after about 2 years of doing that, we realized we'd got the system right. Now we don't need to do it so often. So even if once in 6 months we poll employees, that's enough to tell us who's doing well and who needs help. So I'd really look at it that manage it by consequences versus manage it by process. Then you can have way more flexibility, save the time that we set out to save, improve performance, increase engagement, and more importantly, I think give people a sense of inclusion because they are part of the conversation. That's been our experience so far. Like I said, we're still learning. We do get it wrong sometimes. We do have managers who struggle, and then we do have a lot of managers up the way to senior leaders who really walk the talk. Interestingly, one of our leadership capabilities is role modeling check-in, and we make it as explicit as that. So there's kind of no real escaping check-in. Yeah. If anyone's really interested in what we did, how we failed, how we succeeded, it's all on our website. It's in the invitation that you received. So we try to open source everything that we've done, so it helps. So please do pick up whatever works for you and use whatever you like from there. It's all available, and it includes a couple of videos from employees and our leaders telling you about their experience. If that will help answer some of the questions that some of you have asked as well, which I wasn't able to answer today in the time we had.
We are gone way over time, so I'm going to go into wrapping up. To all our participants and attendees, thank you so much. Your questions and your sharing and insights really added value to all of us. And I love the questions you were asking on how you could implement it with clients in the workplace, individuals and teams. Amrita, you took a conversation that had so much of background information and background research and background implementation and made it all look so simple. So I thank you for that, for making it look so simple, for the huge knowledge and insights you shared. It was really valuable talking to you and listening to you and interacting with you. And I wish we had more time for this. But our time has come to an end, so thank you.
Thanks so much. It was wonderful. Thanks for having me. Folks, thank you for the questions. There's some great challenge. I really wish I could have answered them. I think you've asked some very, very good questions. So thank you. I hope it was useful. Like I said, please go back and check our website out. You probably will find some answers there. Yeah, but until then, thanks very much. I've loved having you.
Thanks, Magda.
Thank you. Thanks, Magda. Bye, everybody.
Thank you both. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.